the 10 human species that once walked the earth. Today, there is only one human species living on Earth. More than 8 billion people inhabit every continent, every climate, and nearly every environment on the planet. Despite our differences in language, culture, and appearance, we all belong to the same species, Homo sapiens. It feels completely normal. But for most of the last 4 million years, that was not the case. Our planet was once home to many different kinds of humans. Some became our direct ancestors. Others evolved along separate branches of the family tree. Some lived alongside us, and a few even left traces of themselves inside our DNA. Who were these ancient humans? How did scientists discover them? What did they look like? How did they survive some of the harshest environments on Earth? And why is Homo sapiens the only human species still alive today? The answers lie buried beneath deserts, hidden inside caves, and preserved within ancient fossils that have slowly transformed our understanding of what it truly means to be human. This is the story of 10 human species that once walked the Earth. We begin more than 3 million years ago in East Africa with one of the most famous fossils ever discovered. Number 10. Australopithecus afarensis. Most people know her by a much simpler name, Lucy. Number 10. Australopithecus afarensis. On the afternoon of November 24, 1974, American paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson and graduate student Tom Gray were surveying an area near the village of Hadar in Ethiopia's Afar Depression. It had been a long and disappointing day. After hours of searching, the team had found very little. As they prepared to return to camp, Johansen decided to take one final walk across a dry gully before leaving the site. While scanning the ground, he noticed a small fragment of fossilized arm bone lying in the dirt. It looked insignificant. But a few steps away, another bone appeared. Then another. Within minutes, the team realized they had discovered something extraordinary. Scattered across the ground were parts of a single ancient skeleton, including ribs, vertebrae, a jaw, fragments of the skull, parts of the pelvis, and several bones from the arms and legs. After carefully excavating the site, researchers recovered about 40% of the entire skeleton. For a fossil more than 3 million years old, this level of preservation was almost unheard of. That evening, while the team celebrated back at camp, the Beatles' song "Lucy in the Sky" with diamonds played repeatedly on a cassette recorder. The fossil quickly earned a nickname that would become famous around the world: Lucy. Scientists later identified Lucy as a member of Australopithecus afarensis, a species that lived across East Africa between approximately 3.9 and 2.9 million years ago. Lucy herself lived around 3.2 million years ago. She was small, standing just over 1 meter tall and weighing roughly 27 kilograms. Her brain measured only about 400 cubic centimeters, roughly 1/3 the size of a modern human brain. At first glance, Lucy looked more like an ape than a human. Her arms were relatively long. Her fingers were curved. Both features suggest that climbing trees remained an important part of her daily life. But the real story was hidden in her lower body. Researchers carefully examined the shape of her pelvis, the angle of her femur, and the structure of her knee joint. Together, these features revealed something remarkable. Lucy walked upright. She did not walk exactly like modern humans, but she clearly spent much of her life moving on two legs. This discovery challenged one of the oldest ideas in human evolution. For many years, scientists believed that large brains evolved before upright walking. Lucy suggested the opposite. Walking came first. A few years later, another discovery provided even stronger evidence. In 1978, British archaeologist Mary Leakey and her team uncovered a trail of fossilized footprints at Laetoli in present-day Tanzania. Preserved beneath volcanic ash, the footprints were approximately 3.66 million years old. They belonged to upright walking hominins with forward-facing big toes and a walking pattern strikingly similar to our own. Although scientists cannot say with complete certainty that Lucy herself made those footprints, they almost certainly belonged to Australopithecus afarensis. For the first time, researchers had two independent lines of evidence. The skeletons demonstrated that early human ancestors were anatomically capable of walking upright. The footprints proved that they actually did. Lucy lived in a world very different from ours. East Africa was becoming drier, as forests gradually gave way to open woodland and grassland. Food was often seasonal, and large predators, including saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and crocodiles, shared the landscape. Researchers believe Australopithecus afarensis probably lived in small social groups, feeding on fruits, leaves, roots, seeds, and occasionally insects or small animals. They likely spent time both on the ground and in trees, climbing to escape predators or to sleep safely at night. Many aspects of their behavior remain uncertain. Unlike later human species, they left behind no stone tools that can be confidently linked to them. That uncertainty is important because science does not replace missing evidence with imagination. It follows the facts. And the facts surrounding Lucy reveal one of the greatest turning points in human history. The first step toward becoming human was not a larger brain. It was standing upright. Once our ancestors no longer needed their hands for walking, those hands became free to carry food, care for children, and eventually shape the first tools. That next chapter begins with another remarkable discovery. Number 9. Homo habilis. Number 9. Homo habilis. If Lucy showed us that walking on two legs came before larger brains, the next species revealed what those freed hands would eventually accomplish. The story begins in Olduvai Gorge, northern Tanzania, one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. For decades, British Kenyan archaeologists Louis Leakey and Mary Leakey searched the ancient rock layers of this vast valley, believing it preserved some of the earliest chapters of human history. In 1960, their search finally paid off. While excavating the site, Jonathan Leakey, the Leakeys' son, uncovered fossil fragments belonging to a young individual. The remains included parts of the skull, the lower jaw, and several bones from the hand. The fossils immediately attracted attention. The skull appeared larger than that of Australopithecus, yet it was clearly more primitive than later humans. Even more intriguing was what lay scattered around the fossils: simple stone tools. 4 years later, in 1964, Louis Leakey, together with South African paleoanthropologist Philip Tobias and British anatomist John Napier, formally described the new species. They named it Homo habilis. The name means handy human. It was chosen for one simple reason. Researchers believed this was the earliest human species known to deliberately manufacture stone tools. Today, scientists estimate that Homo habilis lived between approximately 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago. Fossils have been discovered mainly in Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Africa, suggesting the species occupied much of eastern and southern Africa. Compared with Lucy, Homo habilis looked noticeably more human. Adults typically stood between 1.2 and 1.4 meters tall and weighed roughly 30 to 45 kilograms. Their faces projected less than those of Australopithecus. Their teeth became slightly smaller. Most importantly, their brains had grown considerably, averaging between 510 and 700 cubic centimeters. Although still much smaller than our own, this represented a significant increase in brain size. But Homo habilis did not become important simply because its brain was larger. Its importance came from what that brain allowed it to do. Around the fossil sites, archaeologists recovered hundreds of deliberately shaped stone tools. Today, these tools are known as the Olduvai industry, named after Olduvai Gorge itself. At first glance, the tools appear extremely simple. Most consist of ordinary stones struck together to produce a sharp cutting edge. Yet producing even the simplest stone tool requires a surprising amount of planning. The toolmaker must first recognize which types of rock fracture correctly. They must understand where to strike, how hard to strike, and how to repeat the process consistently. These are not instinctive behaviors. They are learned skills. Perhaps more importantly, they are skills that can be taught. This may represent one of the earliest examples of cultural learning in human evolution. Knowledge was no longer limited to one individual. It could be passed from one generation to the next. That single development changed everything. The Oldowan tools allowed Homo habilis to process food far more efficiently than before. Sharp stone flakes could slice meat from animal carcasses, scrape hides, and cut through tough plant material. Hammerstones could crack open large bones to reach the nutrient-rich marrow inside. Cut marks found on fossil animal bones matched the edges of Oldowan tools, providing direct evidence that these early humans regularly processed animal carcasses. Whether Homo habilis actively hunted large animals or mainly scavenged the remains left behind by predators remains an active area of scientific debate. Most researchers believe they probably did both, depending on the opportunity. Either way, stone tools gave Homo habilis access to food that had previously been difficult to obtain. This richer diet may have played an important role in human evolution. Anthropologists Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler later proposed the expensive tissue hypothesis, suggesting that increased access to energy-rich foods helped support the gradual evolution of larger brains. Although scientists continue debating exactly how diet influenced brain development, there is broad agreement that improved nutrition became one of the driving forces behind later human evolution. Life, however, remained incredibly dangerous. Homo habilis had no controlled fire, no permanent shelters, no metal weapons. The African landscape was home to lions, leopards, giant hyenas, and crocodiles. Several fossil sites preserve human bones bearing tooth marks from large predators. These early humans were not always the hunters. Sometimes they were the hunted. Survival depended on awareness, cooperation, and experience. Every successful day increased the chances of seeing another sunrise. Despite decades of research, Homo habilis continues to raise important questions. Some paleoanthropologists argue that fossils currently assigned to Homo habilis may actually represent more than one species. Others question whether Homo habilis truly belongs within the genus Homo at all. As new fossils continue to emerge, these debates remain open. That is one of the strengths of science. New evidence has the power to change old conclusions. Even so, one fact is beyond dispute. Homo habilis marked the moment when humans began shaping the world rather than simply adapting to it. A broken stone became a knife, a hammer, a tool, and from that simple beginning came every technological achievement that followed. The next member of our family would carry those tools far beyond Africa. They would become the first humans to explore the wider world. Number 8. Homo erectus. Number 8. Homo erectus. If Homo habilis showed that humans could shape the world with simple stone tools, the next species would prove that they could conquer it. The story begins in the late 19th century. At that time, most scientists believed that the earliest human ancestors would eventually be found somewhere in Europe. One man disagreed. His name was Dr. Eugene Dubois, a Dutch anatomist who believed the missing link between apes and modern humans would be discovered in Asia. Determined to test his idea, Dubois left his university career in the Netherlands and enlisted as a military doctor in the Dutch East Indies, giving himself the opportunity to search for ancient human fossils. After several unsuccessful excavations on the island of Sumatra, his team moved to the banks of the Solo River near the village of Trinil on the island of Java. In 1891, workers uncovered the upper portion of a fossil skull. The following year, they discovered a thigh bone only a short distance away. The femur was unmistakably human. It showed that its owner had walked fully upright. Dubois believed both fossils belonged to the same ancient individual. In 1894, He announced the discovery to the scientific world under the name Pithecanthropus erectus, meaning upright ape man. Today, those fossils are classified as Homo erectus, and the specimen is known around the world as Java man. Many scientists rejected Dubois' conclusion. Some believed the skull belonged to an ape, while the leg bone belonged to a modern human. Others refused to accept that an extinct human species had ever existed. The debate continued for decades. Then more discoveries began to appear. In 1927, Canadian anatomist Davidson Black described another remarkable fossil from Zhoukoudian, near Beijing, China. Over the following years, excavations led by Chinese archaeologist Pei Wenzhong and later Jia Lampo uncovered the remains of more than 40 individuals. These fossils became famous as Peking Man. Additional discoveries from Kenya, Ethiopia, Georgia, and other parts of Asia gradually confirmed what Dubois had believed all along. Homo erectus had spread farther than any previous human species. Scientists now estimate that Homo erectus first appeared in Africa around 1.9 million years ago and survived in parts of Asia until approximately 110,000 years ago. That means the species existed for almost 1.8 million years, making it the longest surviving human species ever identified. From an evolutionary perspective, that is an extraordinary achievement. Physically, Homo erectus looked much more familiar than any of its predecessors. Adults typically stood between 1.5 and 1.8 meters tall. Their legs became longer. Their arms became shorter. Their body proportions were remarkably similar to those of modern humans, allowing them to walk and run far more efficiently over long distances. Their brains averaged between 850 and 1,100 cubic centimeters, significantly larger than those of Homo habilis. Although they still possessed heavy brow ridges and a lower forehead, anyone seeing Homo erectus from a distance would probably recognize them as unmistakably human. One discovery completely transformed scientists' understanding of this species. At Manisi, in present-day Georgia, archaeologists uncovered several remarkably complete Homo erectus skulls dating to approximately 1.8 million years ago. These fossils represent the earliest widely accepted evidence that humans had successfully migrated out of Africa. For the first time in history, our ancestors had begun exploring another continent. No maps guided them. No one knew where the journey would end. Generation after generation simply followed rivers, grasslands, and migrating animals. Each generation traveled a little farther than the last. Without ever realizing it, Homo erectus became the first great explorer in human history. Their technology also advanced dramatically. Instead of producing only simple flakes, Homo erectus manufactured carefully shaped stone tools known as Acheulean hand axes. The earliest examples appeared around 1.76 million years ago at Kokisele in Kenya. Unlike Oldowan tools, Acheulean hand axes were shaped on both sides until they became symmetrical. Producing one required planning, precision, and patience. The toolmaker needed to imagine the final shape before striking the first blow. Many archaeologists consider the Acheulean hand axe to be humanity's first standardized technology. Its design remained successful for more than 1 million years. Very few inventions in history have endured for so long. Another question has fascinated scientists for decades. Did Homo erectus become the first humans to control fire? The strongest evidence comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Researchers discovered microscopic layers of ash, together with burned bone fragments, dating to approximately 1 million years ago. Detailed analysis showed that the fire most likely burned inside the cave, rather than being carried in naturally by wind or wildfires. Another important site, Gesher Beno Yaakov in present-day Israel, dated to approximately 780,000 years ago, contains repeated concentrations of burned wood, seeds, and stone tools, suggesting that fire was being used regularly. Although scientists continue debating exactly when fire became fully controlled, Homo erectus remains the earliest strong candidate. If they truly mastered fire, the consequences were enormous. Fire provided warmth during cold nights. It frightened away many predators. It extended the hours available for social interaction after sunset. Most importantly, it transformed food. Cooking breaks down meat and plant fibers, allowing the body to absorb more energy while using less effort to digest it. Anthropologist Professor Richard Wrangham has argued that cooking may have played a crucial role in supporting the later evolution of larger human brains. Although researchers continue debating every aspect of this hypothesis, there is broad agreement that controlled fire permanently changed human evolution. Even with these remarkable achievements, Homo erectus still faced enormous challenges. Changing climates repeatedly transformed the landscapes they inhabited. Periods of drought forced populations to migrate. Volcanic eruptions reshaped entire regions. Predators remained a constant threat. Over hundreds of thousands of years, isolated populations gradually adapted to different environments. Some would eventually evolve into Neanderthals. Others would become the ancestors of our own species. Homo erectus did far more than leave Africa. They transformed humanity into a truly global species. The next chapter of our story belongs to a human who became stronger, hunted together more effectively than ever before, and may represent the last common ancestor shared by both Neanderthals and ourselves. Number 7. Homo heidelbergensis. Number 7. Homo heidelbergensis. By the time Homo erectus had spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia, different populations had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to very different environments. Isolation slowly changed them. Generation after generation, evolution shaped their bodies, their behavior, and eventually their descendants. One of those descendants would become one of the most important species in human evolution. Scientists believe it may represent the last common ancestor shared by both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. That species is known as Homo heidelbergensis. The story began in 1907. At a sand quarry near the village of Mauer, just southeast of Heidelberg, Germany, a worker named Daniel Hartmann uncovered an unusually large fossilized lower jaw buried nearly 24 meters below the surface. The fossil was exceptionally well preserved. It looked human. The teeth were surprisingly modern. But one important feature was missing. There was no chin. The jaw was sent to German anthropologist Professor Otto Schoetensack, who spent months carefully examining it. In 1908, he published a detailed scientific description and proposed that the fossil represented a completely new human species. He named it Homo heidelbergensis, after the nearby city of Heidelberg. Today, the specimen known as the Mauer 1 mandible remains one of the most important fossils in the study of human evolution. Over the following decades, similar fossils were discovered across Germany, France, Spain, England, Greece, Zambia, Ethiopia, and South Africa. Together, these discoveries revealed a human species that lived between approximately 700,000 and 200,000 years ago and occupied both Africa and Europe. Although researchers continue debating exactly which fossils belong to Homo heidelbergensis, there is broad agreement that this species played a pivotal role in human evolution. Physically, Homo heidelbergensis was impressive. Adult males often stood between 1.75 and 1.85 meters tall. Their skeletons reveal broad shoulders, thick limb bones, and extremely powerful muscles. These were among the strongest humans who ever lived. Their brains measured between approximately 1,100 and 1,400 cubic centimeters, approaching the size of modern humans. Their skulls still displayed heavy brow ridges and a lower forehead, but many other features were beginning to resemble our own. Scientists consider Homo heidelbergensis a transitional species, combining characteristics of earlier humans with traits that would later become typical of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. One archaeological discovery completely transformed our understanding of how these people lived. The site is called Schöningen, located in northern Germany. In 1994, archaeologist Hartmut Thieme and his team were excavating an ancient lakeshore when they uncovered something almost never preserved in archaeology: wooden hunting spears. Because the site had remained waterlogged for hundreds of thousands of years, the wood survived in extraordinary condition. Eventually, researchers recovered 8 complete spears, dating to approximately 300,000 years ago. They are among the oldest complete hunting weapons ever discovered. The spears revealed remarkable craftsmanship. Each one had been carefully carved from spruce wood. The thickest section was positioned toward the front, giving the weapon a center of gravity similar to that of a modern javelin. Experimental archaeologists later produced accurate replicas and tested them. The results surprised many researchers. The spears could be thrown with considerable speed, accuracy, and force. These were not crude sharpened sticks. They were carefully engineered hunting weapons. Nearby, archaeologists also recovered the remains of more than 10,000 horse bones, representing dozens of individual animals. Many displayed clear-cut marks left by stone tools. Together, the evidence suggested something extraordinary. Homo heidelbergensis was not simply scavenging dead animals. They were organizing large-scale cooperative hunts. Bringing down healthy wild horses requires planning, communication, and teamwork. Some hunters probably drove the animals toward carefully chosen locations. Others waited in ambush. Success depended on every member of the group performing their role. Many paleoanthropologists consider Schöningen one of the earliest convincing examples of advanced cooperative hunting in human evolution. Their stone technology also continued to improve. Homo heidelbergensis produced finely crafted Acheulean hand axes, many displaying remarkable symmetry. Some archaeologists believe these tools required such careful planning that they may also have served as displays of skill within the group. Researchers have also found evidence that Homo heidelbergensis hunted elephants, rhinoceroses, deer, and other large mammals. This required not only physical strength but also long-term planning and cooperation. Another remarkable discovery comes from Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones, inside the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain. Since the late 20th century, archaeologists including Juan Luis Arzuaga, José María Bermúdez de Castro, and Eudald Carbonell have recovered more than 7,000 fossilized human bones belonging to at least 28 individuals. The fossils date to approximately 430,000 years ago. How so many bodies accumulated inside the cave remains one of anthropology's greatest mysteries. Some researchers believe the cave may represent one of the earliest examples of deliberate body disposal. Others argue that natural geological processes provide a more likely explanation. The debate continues. Among the discoveries was a beautifully crafted red quartzite hand axe. Unlike ordinary tools, it showed almost no signs of use. Researchers nicknamed it Excalibur. Some scientists suggest it may have been intentionally placed with the dead as a symbolic offering. Others remain unconvinced. The evidence is intriguing but not yet conclusive. This is another reminder that science advances by testing ideas rather than accepting them too quickly. Perhaps the greatest importance of Homo heidelbergensis lies in what happened next. Genetic evidence, together with the fossil record, suggests that populations living in Europe gradually evolved into the Neanderthals. Meanwhile, populations remaining in Africa eventually gave rise to Homo sapiens. If this interpretation is correct, Homo heidelbergensis represents the point where our family tree divided into 2 of its most famous branches. One would dominate Ice Age Europe. The other would eventually spread across every continent on Earth. But evolution was still experimenting. Deep beneath the surface of South Africa, another discovery would challenge one of the oldest assumptions in anthropology. For generations, scientists believed that larger brains always meant more advanced behavior. The next species would prove that evolution is far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Number 6. Homo naledi. Number 6. Homo naledi. Some discoveries answer old questions. Others force scientists to ask entirely new ones. The discovery of Homo naledi did both. Unlike Lucy, Homo habilis or Homo erectus, Homo naledi was not found in an open landscape or an ancient riverbed. Its story began deep underground, inside one of the most inaccessible cave systems ever explored by paleoanthropologists. In 2013, recreational cavers Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker were exploring the Rising Star Cave System, located about 50 kilometers northwest of Johannesburg, South Africa. While squeezing through an extremely narrow passage, they entered a chamber that had never been scientifically investigated. Scattered across the cave floor were hundreds of fossilized bones. Realizing the discovery could be important, the two cavers photographed the remains and contacted geologist Pedro Boshoff, who then informed paleoanthropologist Professor Lee Berger from the University of the Witwatersrand. When Berger examined the photographs, he immediately recognized that the fossils might belong to an unknown member of the human family. Reaching them, however, proved to be a challenge unlike anything researchers had faced before. The fossils were located inside what is now known as the naledi chamber. To reach it, explorers had to crawl through passages barely 18 centimeters wide in some places. Most experienced cavers simply could not fit. Instead of abandoning the excavation, Berger issued an unusual international call. He searched for scientists who were not only trained paleoanthropologists, but also experienced cave climbers, with small enough body sizes to enter the chamber safely. From dozens of applicants, 6 women were selected. The media later nicknamed them the underground astronauts because of the extreme conditions in which they worked. Over several weeks, the team carefully documented and recovered the fossils one by one. The excavation became one of the most technically demanding projects in the history of paleoanthropology. The results exceeded every expectation. During the first expedition alone, researchers recovered more than 1,550 fossil specimens. Later excavations increased that number to well over 2,000 bones. The remains represented at least 15 individuals, including infants, children, adults, and elderly members of the same population. Very rarely do scientists discover so many fossils belonging to a single human species in one location. In 2015, Lee Berger and an international team formally described the new species. They named it Homo naledi. The word naledi means star in the Sesotho language, honoring the Rising Star Cave where the fossils had been found. At first glance, Homo naledi seemed almost impossible to classify. Some parts of the skeleton looked surprisingly modern. Others appeared millions of years older. Its feet closely resembled those of modern humans, suggesting efficient upright walking over long distances. Its legs were also remarkably similar to our own. However, the upper body told a different story. The shoulders resembled those of much earlier climbing hominins. The fingers were unusually long and strongly curved, indicating that climbing remained an important part of daily life. Its pelvis retained several primitive features more commonly associated with Australopithecus. Rather than fitting neatly into one stage of evolution, Homo naledi combined characteristics from several different periods of human history. The biggest surprise came when researchers examined the skull. The average brain measured only 465 to 610 cubic centimeters. That is less than half the average size of a modern human brain. For decades, many scientists assumed that increasingly complex behavior evolved alongside steadily increasing brain size. Homo naledi immediately challenged that assumption. Determining the age of the fossils proved equally difficult. Because the cave contained very little volcanic material, traditional dating techniques could not be used immediately. After several years of research employing multiple independent dating methods, including uranium-thorium dating and electron spin resonance, An international team published the results in 2017. The fossils were estimated to be between 236,000 and 335,000 years old. The dates surprised researchers around the world. This meant Homo naledi lived at roughly the same time as some of the earliest populations of Homo sapiens in Africa. Instead of replacing one another in a simple sequence, different human species were sharing the same continent much later than previously believed. Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding Homo naledi is not when they lived. It is why so many of their remains were found deep inside the cave. The naledi chamber contains almost exclusively Homo naledi fossils. There are very few large animal bones. Researchers found no convincing evidence that predators dragged the bodies into the chamber. Geological studies also found little support for repeated flooding, carrying the skeletons deep underground. These observations led Lee Berger and several colleagues to propose an extraordinary hypothesis. Perhaps Homo naledi deliberately placed their dead inside the cave. If true, this would represent one of the earliest examples of intentional body disposal in human evolution. It would also suggest that surprisingly sophisticated social behavior can develop without a large brain. However, many paleoanthropologists remain cautious. Several researchers argue that the available evidence is still insufficient to confirm deliberate body disposal. Alternative explanations continue to be investigated. At present, there is no universal scientific consensus. That uncertainty is important because science does not advance through certainty. It advances by testing competing explanations against the available evidence. Even with these unanswered questions, Homo naledi has already changed anthropology forever. For generations, human evolution was often presented as a simple progression. Larger brains, greater intelligence, more advanced behavior. Homo naledi reminds us that evolution rarely follows such simple rules. Different human species solved similar challenges in very different ways. Some evolved larger brains. Others combined primitive anatomy with surprisingly modern adaptations. Nature was never moving toward a single perfect design. It was constantly experimenting. Homo naledi may be one of the most unexpected results of that experiment. The next discovery would surprise scientists in an entirely different way. This time, the skeleton belonged to an adult who stood little more than 1 meter tall. At first, many researchers believed the individual must have suffered from a serious medical condition. Instead, they had discovered one of the most extraordinary human species ever found. Number 5. Homo floresiensis. Number 5. Homo floresiensis. By the early 21st century, many scientists believed they had already identified the major branches of the human family. Then, on a small Indonesian island, archaeology delivered another surprise. This discovery challenged one of the oldest assumptions in human evolution. The story began inside Liang Bua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores. For several years, Indonesian and Australian archaeologists had been excavating the cave in an effort to understand when humans first reached the island. The international project was led by Indonesian archaeologist Thomas Sutikna, working alongside Australian researchers, including Professor Michael Morwood and Richard Roberts. In September 2003, while excavating nearly 6 meters below the cave floor, the team uncovered an unusually complete human skeleton. The fossil was catalogued as LB1, short for Liang Bua 1. It included a skull, jaw, pelvis, leg bones, and much of the upper body. Immediately, researchers realized they were looking at something extraordinary. The skeleton belonged to an adult female, yet she stood only about 1.6 meters tall. Even more surprising was the size of her brain. CT scans estimated a cranial capacity of only about 417 cubic centimeters, comparable to Australopithecus, a species that had lived more than 2 million years earlier. Nothing about the discovery seemed to make sense. In 2004, the research team published their findings in the journal Nature, proposing that the fossils represented an entirely new human species. They named it Homo floresiensis. Almost immediately, newspapers around the world gave the species a nickname that captured the public's imagination: the Hobbit. Inspired by the small fictional characters created by J.R.R. Tolkien, the announcement sparked one of the biggest scientific debates of the 21st century. Many researchers accepted the evidence. Others strongly disagreed. Some argued that LB1 was simply a modern human affected by a developmental disorder such as microcephaly, Down syndrome, or another rare medical condition. For years, both sides published new research attempting to support their conclusions. As excavations continued, however, more fossils emerged from Liangbua Cave. Researchers recovered remains from several additional individuals. Although incomplete, they displayed the same distinctive body proportions. Independent anatomical studies reached similar conclusions. The wrist bones resembled those of much earlier human ancestors. The shoulders were positioned differently from those of modern humans. The pelvis remained unusually broad. The feet were exceptionally long in proportion to the legs. Even the teeth displayed a unique combination of primitive and modern characteristics. Taken together, the evidence became increasingly difficult to explain as the result of disease affecting a single individual. Today, the overwhelming majority of paleoanthropologists recognize Homo floresiensis as a distinct human species. Scientists estimate that Homo floresiensis lived between approximately 190,000 and 50,000 years ago. This means they survived until surprisingly recently. Modern humans had already begun spreading across Southeast Asia, while Homo floresiensis continued living on Flores. For thousands of years, two very different human species may have existed within the same region. Whether they ever met remains unknown. So far, no direct evidence has been found. One obvious question remained: why were they so small? The leading explanation involves a well-known evolutionary process called island dwarfism. When large animals become isolated on islands where food is limited and predators are relatively few, natural selection often favors smaller body size. Smaller individuals require less food, less water, less energy. Over thousands of generations, entire species gradually shrink. Flores provides remarkable evidence for this process. The island was also home to Stegodon florensis, a dwarf relative of modern elephants. Animals that once weighed several tons gradually evolved into much smaller forms after becoming isolated on the island. At the same time, giant Komodo dragons remained among the island's dominant predators. Evolution was reshaping every species according to the unique conditions of Flores. Humans were no exception. Despite their small bodies and tiny brains, Homo floresiensis displayed surprisingly sophisticated behavior. Stone tools recovered from Liangbua include blades, flakes, and carefully shaped cutting implements. Microscopic wear analysis shows these tools were used to butcher animals and process plants. Archaeologists also recovered the remains of dwarf stegodons bearing cut marks made by stone tools. These people were clearly capable hunters. Some occupation layers contain charcoal and burned animal bones, suggesting repeated use of fire inside the cave. Although researchers continue debating exactly how regularly Homo floresiensis controlled fire, there is little doubt that they successfully adapted to one of the most isolated environments ever occupied by any human species. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Homo floresiensis is not how different they were. It is how evolution actually works. For generations, many scientists imagined human evolution as a steady progression toward larger brains, larger bodies, and greater intelligence. The Hobbit tells a different story. Evolution has no preferred destination. It does not always reward becoming bigger, or stronger, or smarter. It simply favors whatever traits allow a species to survive in its environment. On Flores, being small was not a weakness. It was an advantage. And for well over 100,000 years, that advantage worked remarkably well. Even today, one major mystery remains unsolved. exactly where Homo floresiensis came from. Some researchers believe they descended from an isolated population of Homo erectus that gradually became smaller over many generations. Others argue they may represent an even older branch of the human family that left Africa much earlier. Without ancient DNA, scientists cannot yet answer that question with certainty. The debate continues. And that is what makes Homo floresiensis such an important discovery. More than 20 years after the first skeleton emerged from Liangbua Cave, it continues to challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. The next discovery would surprise scientists in an entirely different way. This time, the evidence was not an extraordinary skeleton. It was a tiny finger bone. From that single fragment, researchers would uncover an entire human species that no one knew had ever existed. Number 4. Denisovans. Number 4. Denisovans. For more than a century, every new human species had been discovered in much the same way. Scientists uncovered fossil bones. They carefully studied their anatomy. They compared them with previously known human remains. Only then did they decide whether they had discovered a new member of the human family. The Denisovans changed that process forever. For the first time in history, an entirely new human species was identified not because of the shape of its bones, but because of its DNA. The story began in 2008 inside Denisova Cave, located in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. For many years, Russian archaeologists led by Professor Mikhail Shunkov from the Russian Academy of Sciences had been excavating the cave. They already knew that Denisova Cave had been occupied many times over hundreds of thousands of years. Stone tools, animal bones, and ancient fireplaces suggested that different groups of prehistoric humans had repeatedly returned to this shelter. During one excavation season, archaeologists recovered a tiny fragment of a finger bone from one of the cave's sediment layers. The fossil belonged to a young girl, probably between 5 and 13 years old. The bone measured only a few centimeters in length. Nothing about its appearance suggested it would become one of the most important discoveries in modern anthropology. Instead of relying only on traditional anatomical analysis, researchers sent the fossil to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. There, Professor Svante Pääbo and his research team attempted something that had only recently become possible. They extracted ancient DNA from the fossil. The results astonished everyone. The genetic sequence did not belong to a modern human. It did not belong to a Neanderthal. Instead, it belonged to an entirely unknown branch of the human family. In 2010, the discovery was published in the journal Nature. Without finding a complete skeleton, without discovering a complete skull, scientists had identified an entirely new human species. They named this newly discovered group the Denisovans, after Denisova Cave where the first fossil had been found. Unlike Neanderthals, the Denisovans remain one of the least understood human species ever discovered. Scientists have recovered only a small number of confirmed fossils. These include the original finger bone, several unusually large molar teeth, fragments of long bones, and a partial lower jaw discovered on the Tibetan Plateau. No complete skeleton has ever been found. No complete skull has ever been recovered. As a result, researchers know far more about Denisovan genetics than about their physical appearance. Genetic evidence suggests that Denisovans and Neanderthals shared a common ancestor between 400,000 and 450,000 years ago. After separating, the two populations evolved independently across different parts of Eurasia. One of the most important discoveries came in 2019, when researchers confirmed that a fossil jawbone from Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau belonged to a Denisovan. This discovery demonstrated that Denisovans had successfully adapted to life at extremely high altitudes long before modern humans arrived in the region. The greatest surprise, however, came not from ancient fossils. It came from living people. scientists compared Denisovan DNA with the genomes of modern populations around the world. The results revealed clear evidence of ancient interbreeding. Today, indigenous people from Papua New Guinea and parts of Melanesia carry between 3 and 5% Denisovan DNA, the highest proportion found anywhere on Earth. Smaller amounts are also present among populations throughout East and Southeast Asia. One inherited gene has proven especially remarkable. It is known as EPAS1. This gene helps people living on the Tibetan Plateau survive in environments where oxygen levels are extremely low. Researchers now believe this valuable adaptation entered our species through ancient interbreeding with Denisovans. Although the Denisovans disappeared tens of thousands of years ago, part of their genetic legacy continues to help millions of people survive today. Another extraordinary discovery followed in 2018. Scientists successfully extracted DNA from another small bone fragment recovered inside Denisova cave. The results revealed that the individual was the daughter of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Researchers nicknamed her Denny. This was the first direct evidence that two different human species not only met each other, but also produced children together. The discovery fundamentally changed how scientists understand human evolution. Rather than replacing one another in a simple sequence, different human species often lived at the same time, occupied the same landscapes, and occasionally became part of the same family. Even today, many important questions remain unanswered. Scientists still do not know exactly what Denisovans looked like. They do not know how advanced their technology became. They do not know whether they created symbolic art or what language they may have spoken. Researchers continue searching for new fossils across Asia, hoping future discoveries will finally reveal the appearance and lifestyle of one of the most mysterious members of our ancient family. The Denisovans remind us that the history of humanity is still full of surprises. A single finger bone revealed an entire human species. Ancient DNA uncovered relatives we never knew existed. Their story also demonstrates that extinction is not always absolute. Part of the Denisovans still lives within millions of people today. The next human species, however, was never hidden from history. Their fossils have been studied for more than 150 years. Their DNA has been successfully sequenced. Their lives have been reconstructed in extraordinary detail. Even so, they remain the most misunderstood members of the entire human family. Number 3. Neanderthals. Number 3. Neanderthals. If there is one human species that has been misunderstood more than any other, it is the Neanderthals. For more than a century, they were portrayed as primitive cave dwellers. They were described as unintelligent, clumsy, and incapable of complex thought. That image appeared in textbooks, museums, films, and popular culture around the world. Modern science tells a very different story. Today, thanks to archaeology, genetics, and advanced medical imaging, researchers have reconstructed the lives of the Neanderthals in extraordinary detail. The evidence reveals not a failed human species, but one of the most successful and resilient members of our ancient family. Their story began in the summer of 1856. Workers quarrying limestone inside Feldhofer Cave in Germany's Neander Valley uncovered a collection of unusual fossil bones. At first, no one understood their significance. The remains were given to local schoolteacher and naturalist Johann Karl Fuhlrott. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Fuhlrott immediately recognized that the bones were extremely ancient. He invited German anatomist Hermann Schaffhausen to study the fossils with him. Together, they reached a remarkable conclusion. The skeleton did not belong to a modern human. It represented an extinct kind of human that had lived long before recorded history. Many scientists rejected the idea. Some argued that the bones belonged to a modern human suffering from severe arthritis or another disease. Others claimed they belonged to a Russian soldier injured during the Napoleonic Wars. The debate continued for years. As more fossils were discovered across Belgium, France, Croatia, Spain, Italy, the Middle East, and Central Asia, the evidence became impossible to ignore. In 1864, Irish geologist William King formally named the new species Homo neanderthalensis. For the first time, science officially recognized that another human species had once shared the Earth with us. Today, more than 400 Neanderthal individuals have been identified from archaeological sites stretching from Western Europe to southern Siberia. Scientists estimate that Neanderthals evolved around 430,000 years ago, probably from European populations of Homo heidelbergensis, and survived until approximately 40,000 years ago. For nearly 400,000 years, they dominated Ice Age Europe. Neanderthals were perfectly adapted to one of the harshest climates humans have ever experienced. Adult males typically stood between 1.65 and 1.70 meters tall, while females averaged around 1.55 meters. Although shorter than many modern people, they were significantly more muscular. Their bones were thicker. Their joints were larger. Their shoulders were broader. Powerful muscles attached to almost every part of the skeleton. Everything about their bodies reflects adaptation to extreme cold. Biologists explain this using Bergmann's rule and Allen's rule. Animals living in colder environments tend to develop shorter limbs and stockier bodies because these proportions reduce heat loss. Neanderthals fit these biological principles remarkably well. Even their large noses served an important purpose. The enlarged nasal cavity helped warm and humidify freezing air before it entered the lungs. Rather than primitive, Neanderthals were highly specialized for survival in Ice Age Europe. Their brains tell an equally fascinating story. The average Neanderthal brain measured between 1,200 and 1,750 cubic centimeters. On average, that is slightly larger than the brain of a modern human. Of course, brain size alone does not determine intelligence. Modern neuroscience has shown that the organization of the brain is far more important than its volume. Even so, these measurements completely overturned one of the oldest myths about Neanderthals. They were never small-brained humans. They possessed brains every bit as impressive as our own. Archaeological discoveries reveal an equally sophisticated culture. Neanderthals manufactured highly specialized Mousterian stone tools, named after the archaeological site of Le Moustier in France. Many of these tools were produced using the Levallois technique, one of the most advanced stoneworking methods of the prehistoric world. Instead of striking random flakes from a rock, Neanderthal toolmakers carefully shaped the stone core before removing flakes of predictable size and form. This required planning several steps ahead. Microscopic wear analysis shows that different tools were designed for different tasks. Some were used to butcher animals. Others scraped hides. Some shaped wooden spears. Others processed plants. These were carefully designed toolkits rather than simple collections of sharp stones. Researchers have also discovered traces of birch tar attached to several stone tools. Producing birch tar requires heating tree bark in a controlled environment with very little oxygen. It is a surprisingly complex manufacturing process. Many archaeologists consider birch tar one of the earliest synthetic materials ever produced by humans. Neanderthals were also exceptional hunters. Chemical analysis of their bones shows diets rich in animal protein. Archaeological sites preserve the remains of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, horses, reindeer, and red deer, many bearing cut marks left by stone tools. At La Côte de Saint-Brelade, on the island of Jersey, researchers believe Neanderthals may have driven herds of mammoths and other large animals towards steep cliffs before killing them. Although archaeologists continue debating the exact details of these hunting strategies, there is little doubt that Neanderthals were highly skilled cooperative hunters. Perhaps the most moving evidence comes from individuals who survived injuries that should have been fatal. One of the best-known examples is Shanidar 1, discovered by archaeologist Ralph Solecki inside Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq. This individual suffered extraordinary injuries during life. His right arm had been severely damaged. He had lost sight in one eye. His hearing was greatly reduced. He also carried evidence of multiple healed fractures. Despite these disabilities, he survived for many years. There is only one reasonable explanation. Other members of his community cared for him. They shared food, protected him, allowed him to remain part of the group. Compassion did not begin with Homo sapiens. It was already part of the human story hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Neanderthals also displayed behaviors once believed unique to modern humans. Evidence from several archaeological sites suggests they deliberately buried some of their dead. Researchers have recovered eagle talons, shells, and feathers that may have been used as personal ornaments. In Spain, uranium-thorium dating indicates that simple cave paintings may have been created more than 64,000 years ago, thousands of years before modern humans reached Western Europe. Although individual discoveries remain debated, the overall pattern has become increasingly clear. Neanderthals possessed culture, tradition, planning, and symbolic thought. Then came perhaps the greatest breakthrough of all: DNA. For decades, extracting ancient DNA from Neanderthal fossils seemed impossible. After years of technological advances, Professor Svante Pääbo and his international research team finally succeeded. In 2010, they published the first draft of the Neanderthal genome. The results transformed our understanding of human evolution. Modern humans and Neanderthals had not simply encountered one another. They had children together. Today, almost everyone whose ancestry lies outside sub-Saharan Africa carries approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Those inherited genes continue to influence aspects of our immune system, skin biology, metabolism, and even our susceptibility to certain diseases. The Neanderthals never disappeared completely. Part of them still survives inside billions of people alive today. Exactly why Neanderthals vanished remains one of anthropology's greatest mysteries. Climate change, declining population size, competition for resources, disease, interbreeding with Homo sapiens. Each of these factors probably contributed. Most researchers now believe there was no single cause. Instead, multiple pressures gradually reduced their populations until the last Neanderthals disappeared around 40,000 years ago. History remembered the Neanderthals as failures. Science remembers them differently. They survived some of the harshest environments humans have ever faced. They mastered sophisticated technology. They cared for one another. They created culture. And they left part of themselves inside us. They were never evolutionary failures. They were our closest relatives. While Neanderthals were thriving across Europe and Western Asia, another branch of humanity was quietly emerging in Africa. Unlike every human species we have encountered so far, its story has never truly ended. Number 2, Homo sapiens. Number 2, Homo sapiens. Every human species we have explored so far contributed something important to our evolutionary story. Australopithecus afarensis took the first confident steps on 2 legs. Homo habilis transformed ordinary stones into tools. Homo erectus became the first great explorer. Homo heidelbergensis mastered cooperation on an entirely new scale. Homo naledi challenged our understanding of intelligence. Homo floresiensis proved that evolution does not always move toward larger bodies and larger brains. The Denisovans left a genetic legacy that still lives within millions of people today. Neanderthals demonstrated that compassion, culture, and complex technology were never unique to our own species. Then, around 300,000 years ago, another branch of the human family appeared. Unlike every species before it, this one is still here. It is called Homo sapiens. The scientific story of our own species has changed dramatically over the past few decades. For much of the 20th century, Researchers believed that Homo sapiens first appeared around 200,000 years ago in East Africa. That understanding changed because of one remarkable discovery. The site is called Jebel Irhoud, located in western Morocco. The fossils were first uncovered in 1961 by miners extracting barite. At the time, scientists believed the skull fragments belonged to Neanderthals. For decades, the fossils received relatively little attention. Everything changed in the early 21st century. Beginning in 2004, a new international research team led by Professor Jean-Jacques Hublin from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology returned to Jebel Irhoud using modern excavation methods. The team uncovered additional skulls, jaws, teeth, and stone tools. More importantly, they applied advanced dating techniques, including thermoluminescence dating, on burned flint artifacts recovered from the site. The results surprised the scientific community. The fossils were approximately 315,000 years old. The findings were published in the journal Nature in 2017. This pushed the origin of Homo sapiens back by more than 100,000 years. Instead of appearing suddenly in one location, many researchers now believe our species evolved gradually through interconnected populations spread across different parts of Africa. This idea is often called the Pan-African origin model. Although research continues, it has become one of the leading explanations for the origin of modern humans. Physically, Homo sapiens differed from earlier human species in several important ways. The skull became rounder. The forehead became taller. Heavy brow ridges became much smaller. The face became flatter. Most importantly, modern humans developed a true chin, a feature that no other known human species possessed. Average brain size reached approximately 1,350 cubic centimeters. Interestingly, this is not significantly larger than the average Neanderthal brain. This forced scientists to reconsider another long-held assumption. Human success was not determined by brain size alone. Researchers now believe the internal organization of the brain, especially regions responsible for language, planning, creativity, and social interaction, played a much more important role. Archaeology reveals another major transformation. At sites such as Blombos Cave in South Africa, researchers uncovered engraved pieces of red ochre, carefully shaped bone tools, and shell beads dating to approximately 75,000 years ago. These discoveries suggest that modern humans were no longer producing objects only for practical purposes. They were beginning to create symbols, identity, art, perhaps even the earliest forms of abstract communication. Other important discoveries from Pinnacle Point, Border Cave, and Sibudu Cave reveal increasingly sophisticated technologies. Researchers found finely crafted stone blades, compound adhesives made from plant resins, and evidence that people deliberately collected pigments. Innovation was accelerating. Knowledge was no longer limited to surviving another day. It was accumulating across generations. Every new discovery became the foundation for the next. Perhaps the greatest advantage of Homo sapiens was neither greater strength nor larger brains. It was cooperation, not simply within families, not simply within small hunting groups, but across entire communities. Ideas could spread rapidly. Knowledge could travel from one generation to another. People who had never met could still benefit from discoveries made hundreds of kilometers away. Culture itself became humanity's greatest survival tool. Around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa. Exactly why remains uncertain. Climate change, population growth, changing ecosystems, new opportunities, all may have contributed. Whatever the reason, these migrations eventually carried our species into the Middle East, Europe, Asia, Australia, and, much later, the Americas. Wherever Homo sapiens traveled, they encountered unfamiliar environments. They also encountered other humans. In Europe, they met the Neanderthals. Across Asia, they encountered the Denisovans. Genetic evidence now shows that these meetings were not always hostile. Interbreeding occurred repeatedly. Today, the genomes of billions of people still preserve evidence of those ancient encounters. Modern humans did not simply replace every other species. For thousands of years, different human populations shared the same landscapes and occasionally became part of the same families. By approximately 40,000 years ago, however, Homo sapiens had become the only surviving human species. Exactly why remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in anthropology. Were we more adaptable? Did our larger social networks provide an advantage? Did climate change favor our populations? Or were we simply fortunate? Most researchers now believe there was no single explanation. Instead, many small advantages accumulated over thousands of years. Greater flexibility, larger social networks, faster innovation, more efficient communication. Together, these factors allowed Homo sapiens to survive, while every other branch of the human family gradually disappeared. Today, our species has transformed nearly every environment on Earth. We have built cities, crossed oceans, invented agriculture, created science, walked on the moon, sent spacecraft beyond the solar system. Yet despite everything we have achieved, one important truth remains. None of it began with us. Every achievement rests upon millions of years of evolution shaped by the many human species that came before. Our story is not the story of a single species. It is the story of an entire family, and that family deserves to be remembered. Number 1. The human family. Number 1. What the fossils really tell us. For generations, human evolution was illustrated as a straight line. A small ape-like ancestor slowly stood taller, became smarter, developed better tools, and eventually transformed into modern humans. It was a simple picture. It was also wrong. The fossil record tells a far more remarkable story. Human evolution was never a ladder. It was a tree with many branches growing at the same time. Some branches survived for only a few 100,000 years. Others endured for nearly 2 million years. Some evolved in Africa. Others adapted to Europe. Others spread across Asia. Several species even shared the planet at the same time. For most of human history, Homo sapiens was never alone. Over the past 150 years, archaeology has completely transformed our understanding of who we are. Each discovery has answered one question while raising several more. Lucy showed us that walking upright evolved long before large brains. Homo habilis revealed that the earliest technology began with nothing more than a carefully broken stone. Homo erectus became the first human to leave Africa, carrying our ancestors into an entirely new world. Homo heidelbergensis demonstrated that cooperation had become one of humanity's greatest survival strategies. Homo naledi reminded scientists that intelligence cannot be measured by brain size alone. Homo floresiensis proved that evolution has no preferred direction, and that survival depends on adaptation rather than perfection. The Denisovans revealed that entire human species can remain hidden until modern genetics uncovers their existence. Neanderthals showed us that compassion, cooperation, and culture did not begin with Homo sapiens. Each species contributed something unique to the story of humanity. None of them was simply a failed attempt at becoming modern humans. Each represented a successful solution to the challenges of its own time. Perhaps the greatest discovery of the 21st century is not another fossil. It is a new understanding of evolution itself. Scientists no longer ask which species was the missing link. Instead, they ask how different human species interacted with one another. Ancient DNA has shown that Homo sapiens interbred with both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that multiple human species occupied the same landscapes for thousands of years. Rather than replacing one another in a simple sequence, they shared environments, competed for resources, exchanged genes, and, in some cases, became part of the same family. Human evolution is not a story of one species replacing another. It is the story of an entire family growing, adapting, and changing over millions of years. Even today, many questions remain unanswered. Large areas of Africa have yet to be systematically explored. Dense forests across Southeast Asia continue to produce unexpected discoveries. New dating techniques regularly change the ages of fossils that scientists believed they already understood. Ancient DNA is revealing relationships that would have seemed impossible only a few decades ago. Every new discovery reminds us that the history of humanity is still incomplete. The next great fossil may already be waiting beneath an unexplored cave, buried beneath ancient river sediments, or hidden beneath layers of volcanic ash. When that discovery is finally made, our understanding of ourselves will almost certainly change again. Perhaps the most important question is not where we came from. It is what truly makes us human. Is it intelligence? Neanderthals possessed brains as large as our own. Is it technology? Homo habilis was making stone tools more than 2 million years ago. Is it walking upright? Lucy mastered that long before Homo sapiens appeared. Is it exploration? Homo erectus crossed continents nearly 2 million years ago. Is it compassion? Injured Neanderthals survived because others cared for them. The deeper scientists investigate our past, the more difficult it becomes to define humanity using a single characteristic. Perhaps being human has never been about one extraordinary ability. Perhaps it has always been about curiosity, the willingness to learn, the ability to adapt, the desire to cooperate, and the determination to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Today, only one human species remains, not because evolution planned it, not because we were destined to succeed, but because one branch of a vast and diverse family happened to survive while many others gradually disappeared. Their stories did not end in failure. They became part of ours. Without Australopithecus afarensis, there would have been no first steps. Without Homo habilis, no technology. Without Homo erectus, no journey beyond Africa. Without Homo heidelbergensis, perhaps no Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. Without the Denisovans and Neanderthals, even our own DNA would be different. Every species we have explored left something behind. Together, they shaped the human story. The next time you look into a mirror, remember this. You are not simply looking at Homo sapiens. You are looking at the last surviving member of a family that once spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia. A family that endured volcanic eruptions, ice ages, predators, droughts, and countless evolutionary challenges. A family whose history is still being uncovered. Somewhere beneath an untouched cave hidden inside ancient rock or buried beneath forgotten layers of earth, another fossil is waiting. Another discovery. Another chapter. Another opportunity to understand where we came from. Because science never truly finishes telling the story of humanity. It simply waits for the next piece of evidence. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through our ancient past, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next exploration into the history of our world. Until next time, keep asking questions, because every great discovery begins with curiosity.